most of these projects will long-term not exist in like 10 or 15 years, right? But punks, Chromie Squiggles, autoglyphs, other high quality art by important creators is going to still exist. And those things will still be culturally important, hopefully to future generations that participate in this. So when I talk about a 30-year arc, I mean, we're really at the beginning of understanding what digital ownership is, non-fungible digital ownership is. And we who are on these social media platforms get it. I don't think the rest of the world fully gets it yet, and they're going to get it. I think the big thing that's actually going to pull people in is happening like right now as we speak.
Welcome to the SquiggleDAO podcast. My name is Jared, and I go online by Jared_pause. I'm the founder of the 8NAP Digital Asset Fund and the platform 8NAP Art, and I'm an eternal Squiggle lover.
And I'm Nifty. I lead finance, acquisitions, and NFT DeFi for the DAO, and I'm another huge fan of Squiggles. Our guest today is DCinvestor. DCinvestor is a project investor, advisor. He was an early collector of NFTs, was early to Ethereum and DeFi. Previously, he was a public sector management consultant for 15 years, and currently he's one of the top collectors and one of the leading voices in the space. So it's an honor to have him with us today. DC, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to this one. Both Nifty and I have done an incredible amount of research and feel like we almost know you to some degree. That being said, in some previous interviews, you've mentioned that you were, early to Bitcoin in 2013, may have fumbled the bag. I'll let others listen to that. And you're also early to ETH in 2016. In 2021, you found NFTs with generative art being really your primary focus and love. In a buddy of mine's podcast, Node, you mentioned a phrase that I really was drawn to. It was act quick like 2021, but slow in exposure. Meaning to me, you're not a trader of NFTs. You've been very public about it, that you have a long-term perspective and you're a collector. And it's allowed you to unlock and really maximize kind of those unrealized gains for you at this point. I say all this because the Web3 space to me is obsessed with the next big thing. And you'd appear to have conviction and time horizons that really push against this trend. And I, for one, will say I admire that. So in your opinion, where are we in the cycle? And currently, where are we in DC's master plan?
Well, I think that, people have probably been watching the markets, and overall we're heating up into the next big bull market, most likely. Fingers crossed, right? Because we never really know for sure. But if this cycle repeats like previous ones, we're relatively early, and we've had a tremendous and exciting kind of run up here in this recent period, especially, talking more broadly about crypto overall, not just NFTs. And if we're lucky, that will eventually start to play out for NFTs as well. And we've seen this already with some tokens, some newer tokens getting bid up in valuations, but also critically, I think like watching something like CryptoPunks, which I think is a good overall index for NFTs in some respects. And it's been interesting to see the strength in CryptoPunks in the past couple of weeks, especially. So I don't know if your question was about where we are within this crypto cycle or within the broader arc of NFT adoption as I see it. So tell me, we can do both of those if you want to talk about both of them.
Well, I will say your commentary on ETH really as a value mechanism and just your unparalleled belief in the ecosystem is really to be admired. I think you touched on like where we are on the overall cycle. Mm-hmm. I think the question was really intended to, I'll say specifically, be about where are we on DC's cycle, because I think for the listenership, you have such a long-term perspective. Mm-hmm. And your ability to act quickly and then hold, I think is really, really unparalleled in this space, or at the very least, there's very few who have done it successfully. Mm-hmm. And I would put you in the top 5, like without a doubt. So like, I guess in DC's master cycle, like where are we in that? Because you bought NFTs specifically in 2021. So for an NFT cycle, where do you think we're at?
So I think we're super, super early when you talk about the broader cycle, right? And I think about this very long cycle, really practice for intents and purposes, the cycle of my life almost is the amount of time that I think this is really going to take out to play out to its potential, and probably not even fully to its potential over that time. But, and within that, we have our smaller crypto cycles roughly every 4 years. So I just told you where I think we are within that overall 4-year crypto cycle. We're kind of starting up, and during the last cycle is the one which really, I think, put NFTs on the map. And it's important to know that that wasn't the first time NFTs were part of the conversation. I mean, NFTs were part of the conversation back in 2017, and they famously crashed Ethereum and just made it expensive to use at the time, which repeated itself in the next cycle as well. But NFTs with CryptoKitties was a huge sensation in 2017, and people were breeding them and so on. And now there's over 1 million CryptoKitties. So but some of the founder cats have still held their value. What we saw during that bear market after that was the emergence of stuff like CryptoPunks and the start of, I think, more of an on-chain, just more of a art movement on chain. Which I don't really recall existing in that 2017 cycle in a significant way. And for me, it wasn't even something that I was really paying attention to at first. It was just, I had heard about it, but I was like, the concept of on-chain jet art didn't really make a ton of sense to me at the time. What made more sense to me was this concept of like in-game items and things like that. So I was buying things like Gods Unchained cards because, I kind of like amateur enjoy stuff like Magic the Gathering and trading card games. So I saw this universe of possibility for these assets, which you could store on chain, trade, and then use in terms of games. It wasn't really until like the 2021, I think it was 2021, where NFTs like really started to take off. And that was when CryptoPunks kind of exploded in popularity. So I had just left my job as a consultant, I think in January 2021, and I had started to kind of focus on the space more. And I looked at it and I said, you know what, this is still like really immature stuff in terms of the art space. I was like, in the collectible space, I was like, but my thought process was, well, if Ethereum continues to be important and crypto continues to be important, some of these early art and collectibles are going to be important as part of like a cultural fabric for this decentralized movement that we're all a part of. And so I really started to go into land grab mode, and I just started buying a bunch of stuff. And it started off slow. I started off with like a couple of punks, kept coming back, started adding generative art into the mix as well. And my thesis was it's still super early. And if this stuff takes off, it's going to be bigger than I can possibly imagine. And if it doesn't, well, then I've lost the money that I put into it, but it's worth a shot based on what I was seeing in terms of like the emergent cultural markers and things like that. And we all know what happened in 2021. Things absolutely exploded from that point. And my holdings, my collection ended up performing financially in a way that I thought would take 10 to 20 years to achieve that level. But that's one of the interesting things about crypto is because of the amount of money and how fast it can move, stuff can get priced very quickly. It can get irrationally bid up and the reflexivity can kick in. But I would also say that it became more quickly valued to a portion of its potential than it would have if all this stuff was on chain and settlement takes days or weeks and physical goods have to be transported. But for us digital natives, it's like, hey, let's go. And I would agree with you that a lot of participants in the space right now are very like short term and really play into reflexivity. I've done the polar opposite of that. I basically just buy stuff that I think is going to be important over like a 20 or 30 year time horizon. So when you ask me where we are in my timeline here, I think we're on like year 4 of like 30 in terms of like how big this stuff will ultimately become. And there's a lot of drivers that I think will play into how things, what will drive the much higher valuation of some of these assets, which we can talk about. But I think we're still very early overall.
I appreciate that response because, and just to kind of reiterate, you're taking a 30-year time horizon, which I think is important to look at. And obviously, you've only invested the amount that you thought you could lose. I call it my Vegas money. I kind of came into it with the same amount, a little bit more now than before because of the higher conviction. But I think that's a good baseline to go against. Is if you're looking at that S curve of adoption, I agree with you. We're still ridiculously early on the art cycle. So thank you for that thoughtful response.
And taking a step back, I especially like how you simplify complex topics on your X account, giving really valuable advice. And I would like to get your simple ETH and NFTs thesis. How do you put it to someone that is joining now this space, and the biggest risk to those theses?
Sure. I think that I'll start with ETH. I think overall, crypto is something that's going to be important for our civilization moving forward. And I think it's going to go through some challenging times. It's going to go through some exciting times. There's still a lot of regulatory uncertainty, but we are seeing greater and greater interest among the general population and financial institutions to participate in crypto. You see that through the launch of the Bitcoin ETF. I think we're going to see it in the run up potentially to an Ethereum ETF as well, which could happen even this year. And overall, I think there's a interest in using these digital ledgers to store value, not just pure in a pure money kind of way. And so like I view Bitcoin as digital gold. I really view Ether as this form of like programmable money. So Bitcoin natively on its layer one blockchain is not something you can really program in a robust way. There's a little bit of scripting and things like that you can do. But if you want to do anything significant with it, you have to typically layer on additional trust assumptions to that. Ethereum is a little bit of a different beast. And I mean, Ethereum is very different from Bitcoin in the sense of it is this asset that can be programmed to do almost anything. When it was first emerged, people were really using it, and the devs really talked about it as like gas for this blockchain network, which it still is. You still have to pay for your transaction fees with Ether as gas. But it's pretty clear and obvious that the value proposition of Ether goes far beyond gas into this programmable asset that's used to basically provide liquidity for the entire NFT economy and the entire like tradable token economy. And there are other assets that play into that, like real world assets, as they call them, which are like, things like USDC and USDT, those kinds of assets are basically dollars that are held in bank accounts, which are brought on chain. All those things are important, but the entire NFT economy continues to be denominated in Ether for the most part. Certainly all of it on Ethereum, but even off of Ethereum, people often talk in ETH terms. So it kind of gives you a sense of how important Ether is today to this decentralized economy. And I think I think that role is going to be shared with more and more assets moving forward. But I think Ether is going to be a critical part of that economy moving forward. And even a lot of the NFT traders that participate in the space do it to accumulate more Ether. So that's kind of my view of Ether long term. And I won't go into what I think the vision is around scaling and all of that, but I'll just summarize it to say, there's a lot of exciting development going on now around scaling Ethereum through layer twos and so on. And I think all of that is going to increase the reserve demand for Ether. And it's going to allow more people to use Ether as a currency, because that's really the main reason to use Ethereum is you want censorship resistant access to Ether, which is a multi-$100 billion asset. I think this cycle is probably going to become hopefully $1 trillion asset, and then in the future, multi-$1 trillion asset. And when we think about NFTs within that, I really view NFTs. I mean, look, NFTs are going to be used for so many different things. And we are in the most primitive stages of that right now. But I think that in that primitivity is a certain innocence and a level of interest in terms of what's being tried. And I think the art stuff is probably the most interesting and pure expression of that to me. And I'm talking about the stuff from like true artists who are putting their heart and emotions into every piece, not just the people who are trying to churn out stuff and make a quick buck. They're out there too, but there are real artists, digital artists who have been creating in some cases for years or decades prior to this, who now have a medium through which they can publish and sell their work versus just selling like prints of it. Right. So we're at the first stage of that. And we've also seen some utility NFTs emerge alongside that as well. And a lot of these profile pictures and so on really fit into that utility NFT mindset, which I'll be honest with you guys. And I think most people who have heard me speak before would know that I'm not like super into those utility applications. It's just not it's not really why I'm not really interested in stuff that has all these additional trust assumptions where I'm going to have to trust some team to execute something on my behalf in perpetuity to preserve the value of something. To me, it's like, why would I buy that when I can buy like a CryptoPunk or an Autoglyph or a Chromie Squiggle or whatever, right? To me, just long term, right? Because I'm not selling a lot of my holdings. I like prefer to buy once and just hold and then sell once at some point in the future for some of it, maybe.
I mean, today is the 25th of January, 2024, for anybody who's listening to the recording. And I mean, you're very public on your X account about removing some of your ETH from Coinbase staking for that exact trust, not that exact, but for a correlative type of trust discussion. So I think it's important to have that conversation, and it's a really interesting perspective that you bring up pertaining to these other assets outside of art.
Yeah, I think that for the people who got into crypto when I got into it, which was like in 2013 timeframe, um, our default view is actually to not trust anybody in the space, like most of us. And for newer entrants, especially people who joined in like 2021, 2022, a lot of them are more like, well, let's see what these teams can do. And it's just like, dude, I've seen so many teams come and go. I'm not interested. It's not to say that I don't want to support any teams that are trying to do stuff, because I do, but it's just like my assumption on how things are going to play out is very conservative, because you don't really know how most of these projects will long term not exist in like 10 or 15 years, right? But punks, Chromie Squiggles, autoglyphs, other high quality art by important creators is going to still exist, and those things will still be culturally important, hopefully to future generations that participate in this. So when I talk about a 30-year arc, I mean, we're really at the beginning of understanding what digital ownership is, non-fungible digital ownership is. And we who are on these social media platforms get it. I don't think the rest of the world fully gets it yet, and they're going to get it. I think the big thing that's actually going to pull people in is happening like right now as we speak. The emergence of like VR and AR as a capability for interacting with these assets is going to be unbelievably important. And I don't think people really get it, because a lot of people out there still think VR and AR is like a gimmick. But now that Apple's getting into it, I think this is like the signal of there's no turning back now. This is like the future of computing, most likely. This is the future of online digital interaction by extension. And this is going to be the future of how we interact with and experience our digital assets. And so some of these early non-fungible digital assets are going to become like impossibly important. And I don't think most people are ready for that yet.
Yeah, makes total sense. And coming back to the 30-year time frame versus the 3-year time frame, totally agree. You have an incredibly well curated collection of some sets, obviously the glyphs, the ringers, the fidenzas. I would also highlight the memories. But you've mentioned before that you don't normally mint and buy on secondary. What's your approach to collecting?
Well, I've always been really bad at RNG, so I always get like, so I just prefer not to mint. I mean, like, I think the fact that the works are minted and are not predetermined by the artist is actually extremely interesting to me. And that's a core part of my value proposition for wanting to collect on-chain digital art, right? I've always preferred that to an artist. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for artists minting their own work, even generative artists, and curating those outputs and sharing them. I think it takes something else to create an algorithm and put it loose on the chain and see what happens to it and what the outputs are. But for me as a collector, a long-term collector, I like to be able to curate a story most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. I want to be able to buy and select the pieces that I think best represent a set for me. And I'll usually do it from like pieces that are on the floor. I don't like to pay a premium for like rare attributes. I will pay an aesthetic premium, but I don't typically go for like the rarest mints. And this was a mindset that was like pretty foreign in early 2021. Even when I bought my hoodie punk, people are like, why would you get a hoodie when you can get this for the same price? I was like, look, and I just laid it out. I said, in the future, it's not going to be a bunch of like math nerds that are deciding how rare something is. Scarcity is going to be driven by how desirable a given attribute is. And yeah, math nerds are going to be, it's a market. Everyone's expressing themselves, right? So if you think that some super rare attribute is most important, then you're going to assign value to that. But my hypothesis is as more people get involved, it doesn't just become a pure rarity play, and scarcity is like a relative thing.
Well, I have to say, your curation of your memory set is phenomenal. I remember when you were buying them, but like you essentially picked up pallets and then you got a triptych of each pallet, and the way they pair. I mean, even I'm assuming it's been coordinated with backgrounds, and it was just it was really mind blowing the commitment you had to the curation portion, at least for that specific buy. So I think you're doing a phenomenal job, honestly.
Yeah, thanks. And I would love to do that with more sets. Unfortunately, like it's hard and expensive to do it all the time. So you got to do what you can do within your means. But that was my philosophy also, and part of that is my philosophy as a collector and curator, but also as someone who might sell some of these at some point. I always thought, well, it's going to get harder and harder to assemble like a good triptych for somebody, right? And I think generative art kind of lends itself to being often displayed in pairs or triptychs or just in sets and grids. I think the nature of the format and of the art form is often conducive to that. And so, in like 5 years or even now, it's going to be almost impossible to pull together any meaningful triptych that you feel like could be coordinated in the kinds of ways that I've done it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you have on your interview with von Mises in Provenance, he brought out your Lux palette Fidenza triptych, and I have to echo that sentiment. It's just absolute amazing pairing. You collected Fidenzas and triptychs. I think it will age well, but time will tell.
Time will tell.
And it makes sense to show the breadth, how broad an algorithm is, to show the set and see a Fidenza micro next to a jumbo or whatever. I think it's what makes it more interesting. No, we just saw the first ever 5-year loan on an NFT. Just happened on Gondi a few hours ago. It was on a Squiggle. And what do you think about the NFT lending, NFT finance space?
So I think that overall, NFT lending is going to be a tremendous form of utility for art NFTs and for NFTs in general. And I think just overall, the ability to borrow against any asset on chain is absolutely huge, in my opinion, and is a huge. And part of the reason why I'm excited about NFTs alongside something like Ether is because NFTs represent true like decentralized value, right? There's not really dependencies to anything else, right? Even USDC and USDT have a dependency to where's that US dollar in a bank account? Is it actually there? Can you prove it? So on, right? Even like a utility PFP has this dependency on, is the team going to continue to execute? What if they stop? What if they go out of business, right? With decentralized art, there is not really a lot of dependency like that, right? There's certainly a dependency on like what is the brand of this artist and what are they going to keep creating? How will this work contribute to culturally to new participants as they come in and new creators as they come in? Is it something that's foundational? All of those things. And so I think that there's something really cool to me about the fact that there are no dependencies for NFT art, which makes them ideal for lending collateral because they can't be rugged, right? There's no one that can like pull a plug off chain and say, oh, well, there goes your Chromie Squiggle. It doesn't exist anymore. There's literally no one that can do that. And I think that's super, super powerful. So I think that NFTs are going to make maybe like, I mean, Ether is probably the best collateral on Ethereum and probably the best lending collateral in all of crypto. Some people might disagree with me on that, but in terms of being able to secure trustless loans against it with good terms and high liquidity, it's kind of unmatched. But I think NFTs are really an interesting second and it could become, I won't say it'll become more impactful than Ether for lending, but I think it'll become extremely, extremely significant. And lending and borrowing against art is nothing that's new, right? That's the other thing. This is something that's been going on literally for hundreds and hundreds of years where people buy and own valuable artifacts. Usually they're doing so in like free ports, and they're getting financing against them, either to buy them or to borrow against them. And in some cases, they never even take custody of the work. And if you're doing that, it's like, if you're already doing that, is it really that much of a leap to say, hey, I've got this NFT that I'm self-custodying, I'm displaying it on the internet, look, I own this, and now I'm borrowing against it? It almost seems like a better proposition than like borrowing and lending through a free port.
100% better. And if someone has gone through the process of a mortgage and through the process of getting a loan on an NFT, it's impossible not to be bullish.
100%.
Yeah, the amount of friction. I think that's one of the things I love about blockchain. Whether it's an artist previously trying to get into a gallery or getting a loan, the amount of friction reduction in the blockchain and digital space is significantly less. I frequently will buy an NFT, albeit low value, just to show people like the ease of transacting and how easily things can move. It's for people who are not familiar with this space, it's kind of mind-blowing the speed at which you can transact. So it definitely has me bullish on the space. But we are the SquiggleDAO, and I would be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the Squiggle. So in other podcasts, one of the things I admire about you is you're not playing any games. You've stated that everything is for public consumption. So you use, I mean, obviously a hot wallet for some other things, but your public wallet is your public wallet, and everything's on display. So in there, made research really easy. You have 6 squiggles, 2 of which are fuzzies, and you have 4 normals, and all but one fuzzy was bought 3 years ago. Very, very, very or very close to when you started deploying ETH and found the art NFTs. What thesis did you have around the squiggle at the time of purchase, and has that changed?
Well, when I first saw squiggles, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't fully get them, right? I was like, what is this? And I was like, okay, that's cool. I mean, because my entry point into generative art was really through CryptoPunks. I first started buying CryptoPunks, and it was really through being in that Discord that I learned about Art Blocks, which was a relatively new platform at that time. By the time I got involved, the Ringers Mint had just concluded around that time frame. And when I saw Ringers, they really captivated me and pulled me into this whole idea of algorithmic art. And I was like, this is absolutely fascinating stuff. And from the rest is kind of history from there. I started buying Ringers. The first piece I ever bought was Genesis Zero by DCA, which was also a day one set. And so I'm excited to have that piece in my collection. And I really just started collecting stuff that I thought aesthetically was very interesting to me. And Ringers were kind of number one in that. And I got some squiggles after that. And because I started to think more about, okay, well, what is this squiggle really? Because it's just like a squiggly line. It's got some colors, right? And I was just like, yeah, artistically, is it interesting? I was like, it is interesting. And I've come to appreciate it a lot more over time, frankly. But what squiggles represented is so much more than just art, right? I mean, squiggles are representative to me of the entire generative art movement in a pretty significant way. They were the first set created on Art Blocks, which has become an incredibly important platform for generative art. They're by Snowfro, who is one of the most important creators and business leaders in the entire crypto space, certainly in the NFT space. And what I came to understand, and especially this was before the formation of SquiggleDAO, but I started to view them as almost like a social token, where this is a way to participate in it. And they were pretty cheap for a long time too, by the way. I mean, like certainly a lot cheaper than they are now. You could get one for an ether or less. I wish, of course, in hindsight, I would have bought like 100 of them and just like sat on them. I didn't have that kind of foresight. Some other people did, and good for them. They deserve that. So for me, I just decided to collect some that I thought appealed to me aesthetically. And to me, I really love the fuzzy squiggles. Again, one of those situations where it's not the rarest or anything like that, right? But I was like, they're beautiful to me. Like artistically, I think they're really interesting. I've always been a fan of like impressionist art as well. And they kind of like evoke that kind of energy to me, especially when you view them within the context of the rest of the set. I came really close to buying like a hyper squiggle, and I remember I was chatting with D's and DMs, and I was like, I didn't know a lot about squiggles at that point, so I was relying on some of the people in the punks Discord to help me think through it. And I don't remember what it was. It was definitely a fraction of what it costs now. And I was like, do you think this is a good buy? And by the time I heard back from him, someone had already bought it, and that was slipped right through my fingers. So
Well, it's official. You heard it here first. DC is part of the Fuzzy fam.
100%.
I'm a big. It was actually the first. I don't hold it anymore, but the first Squiggle I ever bought was a Fuzzy for that reason.
Nice.
And Von Mises was actually helping me with some of those buys. And I've acquired a number of different Fuzzies. Fortunate to have some like really nice ones in the collection. So I too, like you, was drawn to it. It's almost the softer texture just made it unique amongst the collection, but like still distinctively a part of the overall collection, which is the Squiggles. So
Yeah,
uh,
and just expanding on the thesis a little bit behind squiggles, I think squiggles are interesting because of that social fabric layer to them, but also with there being 10,000 of them, right? Which is big for, and that was also part of the reason why I didn't buy them at first. Cause like, there's so many of them. And then I was like, but over time, it's like, that's actually an asset because it allows you to develop a bigger network of collectors. And of course it wouldn't work for every collection, but it works beautifully. I mean, this is just like the casual genius of Snowfro, really. I don't know if he like fully thought all this out and like was like one day this is going to become this huge thing where tens of thousands of collectors all over the world are going to want to participate in this. But he had the foresight to have this first collection be something that was big so that it could be relatively inclusive. But within that large set dynamic, it's kind of like you see in CryptoPunks, there's almost a semi-fungibility on the floor of those kinds of sets, which engenders their use as this financial collateral, as something that people were trading. So that also continues to drive interest into this. And of course, there's going to be people like me who just sit on them and hold them. But there is this dynamic nature to the market of something like squiggles that doesn't exist for a lot of sets because it's just the supply gets locked up and it is what it is. And I mean, look at something like Ringers and Fidenza now. When one of those moves, people will like, it's almost an event, right? Whereas squiggles are trading more regularly, but I think that just kind of makes them economically, when you talk about a collateral perspective and from a quote unquote investment perspective, it just makes them a lot more interesting in some respects.
yeah, I mean, you bring up kind of the foresight of Eric, and we've talked to him, and he talks about how it was originally intended to be this very inclusive thing where he gave out squiggles, to his designers for thousands of them, and nobody claimed, and he really had this vision of like people being able to be drawn to him and create that community. So very juxtaposed to autoglyphs and ringers, which are amazing in their own right. But so
Mm-hmm.
that being said, is there a lot of people rally around Eric, right? Like because of a lot of the good qualities that you mentioned. Is there a specific quality to Snow that you found yourself drawn to more than others?
I found him, especially early on, as I started to get involved with NFTs and generative art. I found him as someone who was truly interested in advancing NFTs as part of this digital art movement. And first and foremost, it always, even from day one when I first interacted with him on art blocks, you could tell that that was his passion. His passion was not to create some like successful Web3 business. From what I could tell, right? His goal was not to be a successful business person. His goal was to create a really great art platform for artists. And I would talk to artists and they would all speak highly of Snowfro as well. They would all speak to his commitment to the art form, to the artists, and to the artistry. And for something like this, that's just like to me, it made sense. And I got the vibe. Part of the reason why I became so interested in generative art was because of people like Snowfro. I saw that this was not something, and granted, as more money came into the market, you can say that the vibe changed a little bit, but I think those authentic creators are still there. I think the people who care about the art form are still there. And Snowfro still continues to be one of now many beacons for people like that. And when I first saw what Artblocks was doing and really got the value proposition, I started talking to him more. And eventually I became like a small investor in Artblocks. And Snowfro reached out to me and offered me a chance to invest in the platform. And he's like, he was kind of forthright about like, look, we don't really know what this is going to look like. And I was like, dude, I don't really care if I see a return from this. I really just want to be a part of the journey and to contribute to this. And I have no idea what my investment is worth now, but I thought it was cool that I got the opportunity to write a little check and be a little part of history. And, I think the legacy of Artblocks is already tremendous. And I think when I look back in like 50 years on the legacy of Snowfro and other people at Artblocks and outside of it, it's just going to be tremendous.
Yeah, I've said it before. If there's ever a Mount Rushmore of like not only the blockchain but the digital art space, Snow's face is definitely going to be chiseled in for eternity. He's
100%.
an evangelist of incredible proportion and one of the hardest working people in this space, and for all the right reasons, right? We've had a couple of his like personal friends on the pod, and they spoken to his character, prior to Web3, post Web3, and it's really, really encouraging when you want to rally around like the person behind the art to be able to have such an incredible human being behind it too. Now that being said, what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear Snowfro?
That's a tough one. I think that honestly, he there's a certain, I would say earnest. There's a certain earnestness in when you interact with him, whether it's in person or if it's online, which is where a lot of our interaction has been. He is, you see what you get. You know what I mean? There's not really, he's not someone that's operating with a lot of like ulterior motives, which I think is like somewhat rare in the crypto space sometimes, where everyone's got an agenda. Like his agenda is pretty transparent. He's really focused on that art form. So I think like, and that's why people are drawn to him, and a lot of the creators are drawn to him because they can sense that. And you can't really, it's hard to fake, you can't fake it over the time frame that he's been doing it. You can fake something like that for like a week, a month, but you can't do it over a period of years. And even like stuff like when there was tremendous pressure during the last market where people were like pressuring him to like drop an Artblocks token. And, I talked to him about that too. And we both kind of agreed, well, what's the purpose of a token and what value is it going to add? And he's like, I'm not just going to drop a token and be stuck with the legacy of that when we don't know what to do. We have our art that people can collect, and that should be incentive enough. And that was a very like contrarian position for a while. And people were like really upset, especially when things got really reflexive and heated up in the generative art market and then crashed, before they swung back up. People were just like going crazy. People were out for blood. They just wanted anything that they could get. And it took a lot of like, I think, courage to just stand up to that and say, look, we're not going to compromise the art. We're spending our effort and time and money to advance the art, but within this on-chain community, but also off-chain. And I think there's really been no other entity that's done that better than Artblocks from what I've seen.
100%. And I love the word earnest for Snow, because you're right. Like there's a lot of grifters in the space, but there's also amazing people. And the fact that, Eric's been able to showcase his true character on such a long timeline it's really impressive. And honestly, as a builder myself, it's very inspiring. He's definitely a beacon of positive light in the space, and it's something to be admired from many perspectives.
That's what you said, that after a few years, everyone gets the reputation he or she deserves. And I think Snow has proven himself as deserving the best one. Let's jump into a few rapid fire questions. We always say that the questions are rapid fire. The answers don't need to be. Okay. First one is, you've mentioned a hyper squiggle that got away. Any other grail that got away and the story behind it?
I think that's probably the one that I still look back on every day. Not every day, but periodically. It's like, damn, I should have collected one of those. And there's always pieces from other collections that I wish I could have collected, but I think I got a lot of what I really wanted.
Your collection's amazing. I did, in one interview, you mentioned that you should have gotten 12 autoglyphs instead of 6. But for those who don't have any, I will say you're sitting pretty, my man.
Even when I bought those, a lot of people are like, it was kind of like what I just shared about Squiggles. It's like, they're just like black and white thing. And even that was my reaction to them at first too, because I was like, what is this? It looks like ASCII art. And then I understood it and I was like, oh my God, this is like so cool, but it takes some time to understand that.
Have any of your views changed over time about NFTs?
I've become more bullish if that's possible because I now see that, like, especially the fact that we've now survived probably what is hopefully the worst of the bear market, and a lot of this stuff didn't go to zero. It actually held really substantial value. And granted, it was like a lot of the stuff was down by like 80 to 90% from the top, but the fact that it like came back and we're now back to like close to, you know, even like 50%, some stuff closer to 100% of value just shows that this stuff is a lot more sticky than people thought. And I think the people who are fading like on-chain, digital, global, distributed culture are going to regret it because this is one of the most important movements in modern history, in my opinion.
You may be a bull on ETH, but I love the bull on NFTs too. The art thing. That's really encouraging to hear you're even more bullish, man. I sometimes in our little echo chamber, it's I feel the same way, but it's cool to hear that.
I'm in the echo chamber too, but I really feel like, my conviction hasn't waned at all, which is why, I mean, like, people are like, and part of the reason why I haven't acquired a lot of stuff recently is because I don't want to sell any of the stuff that I have, like, and that's the thing. Like, a lot of people are cycling through things. I'm more like, hey, if it was good when I bought it 4 years ago, it's probably better now. Most of the stuff is, right. Most of the stuff that I bought, I feel like, has aged pretty well. Not everything, and we all make mistakes and get caught up in FOMO and hype. But like most of the stuff I bought, I was like, I'm not selling this for at least like 5 to 20 years or maybe, longer or never. We'll see.
You've been digging into health a lot lately. What's your top app, hack, routine that you would recommend?
I think whatever gets you moving is the best thing that you can do. A couple of things that I do and I've been focused on more is I've got like an Apple Watch and there's other like trackers and stuff like that. It's telling me to stand up right now, by the way, but that's okay. But I feel like it's just a good motivator to help you track like how active are you, especially for people like us who spend a lot of time at computers. You lose track and it's good to have that reminder. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, and I know not everybody can do this, but I have one of these tonal home gyms, which is basically like a resistance trainer that you put up on a wall. It almost looks like one of like the old style TVs turned sideways, and it's got these arms that come off it, but it can produce hundreds of pounds of resistance. So you can get a full workout from that. I think if you have the means and if you're at home a lot and stuff like that, having stuff like that is a good investment. As well as having some access to a little bit of cardio equipment. I also think just having a gym membership and going at least 2 days a week or something like that is a great investment. And I mean, like, everybody has different ways of doing this. I mean, in the comments, you're going to tell people, there's going to be people telling you don't need to own anything. You can just do resistance and body weight exercise. And they're absolutely right, by the way. Whatever gets you moving, just do it. And if you're someone who hasn't moved in a while and you're just like dreading it, like, just do it. Just go out there and walk like 2 miles, and then do 2 more like 2 days later. And then eventually keep every week, add something else to your routine. And I think we can all benefit from being more active. Almost all of us can.
Especially us spending so much time at home, makes total sense. Last one from me. You've had tremendous success in your career. What motivates you to continue?
Well, I kind of left my formal career of being that management consultant. Now I'm kind of in a more privileged position where I can focus on the things that interest me the most. So for me, I really want to see this decentralized movement continue and to be successful. I think there is a lot of value to the concepts which underpin this movement, and there's a lot of noise layered on top of that, shorter term noise about token prices and so on. But long term, I think the value of what we're creating is really important. I think it's only going to become more important as we transition more into these digital realms that we're all living and working in. And so I think all of us who are in this space at this point kind of have a responsibility to ensure that we think through how do we turn this into a space that stays decentralized and doesn't just become owned by like a couple of corporations like we saw with Web 2. I think Web 2 is like the biggest cautionary tale that we can see. I don't know if we'll be successful, but I think that we we've got to try. And I think a huge part of that is creating a culture that exists outside of these corporations and having ownership of these digital assets that exist outside of their control. And to me, that is why NFTs are so important. And, I hope they go up in value a lot because it will help with that whole concept.
Oh, it's pretty impressive. And kind of a segue from that about your freedom. One of the things that my favorite posts you had was about how you don't utilize capitalization. You use all lowercase as kind of like a subtle, finger back to the corporate America, which I absolutely adore. So to me, that's a sign of freedom, and it kind of leads me to the question of like, how do you define success, and then has that changed for you over time?
For me, so in terms of the capitalization thing, there's going to be a few people who might remember my previous avatar on Twitter, which was basically like a picture of me in a suit, as like transitioning from my consulting world into like, okay, here I am, this real person operating in Web3. And then when I left, I was like, you know what? This isn't really me. That's like who I was like paid to be for years, and it's someone who I was successful as. But I realized that there's a lot more to life than just putting on a suit and giving off a certain impression every day. And I was like, you know what? Like, there's no reason to be formal anymore. Like, I'm just out here talking to a bunch of degens like me. And, I mean, like, so it's just like natural. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to use the shift key anymore. There's like a subtle rebellion against it, perhaps, but like, that's what it was. And it wasn't really something like intentional. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, that was clever of you to do your brand like that. I was like, nah, man, I wasn't like trying to do a brand when I did that. It's just like, I was like, nah, I just don't feel like I need to be formal anymore. Right. It was like after spending 15 years of being formal, waking up every day, going and serving clients and like figuring out how to make sure I'm presenting like the right image. I don't have to care about that anymore. And I think that was something, maybe it's something that I should have realized like sooner, and internalized earlier, but at least I came to the realization when I did.
I'm thoroughly impressed. The lack of commitment to the shift key and how well that can position you for everything else in life. Another thing that like popped up in the provenance space is you made a reference to the Antiques Roadshow and how it kind of helped you tune your intuition for early NFTs, which I found really really encouraging. Being a Antiques Roadshow fan myself, so how do you filter for opportunities?
So there's two parts to that comment, and or at least I'll add two parts to it. So the first is like the two things that have probably informed me most in my early collector journey, which a lot of people are like, how do you know what to collect? It's like, guys, I'm not some savant collector who's collected a lot of stuff, right? But I spend a lot of time collecting like trading cards, and like I just find like tracking like the Magic the Gathering like trading card market to be something that's really interesting to me. And I think there's actually an overlap of those participants within the crypto space. So there's some there's some correlation there. And the other side was Antiques Roadshow, which I always thought was like a really interesting show because I've always found it as someone who's always liked to collect things, but hasn't, well, I don't have infinite space or infinite money. So I haven't really been able to collect like a lot of physical objects, but I think it's interesting to me how like this old stuff is like worth a lot, and why is it worth a lot? And I love the episodes where they like film them 15 years ago and then they come back and they say, here's what it's worth now. And you kind of think about, well, why was that worth more? And why is that piece of Baroque furniture not worth as much anymore? Oh, it's because it's so big and people actually don't have houses that big anymore. And so they're collecting smaller things now. I mean, like there's all of these like little micro trends that determine why something is valuable. But to me, like having that good provenance and origin story, especially for something like NFTs, is really important. And it's not the only thing that matters. Obviously, the artistry of the work matters. The story of how work fits into an artist's journey matters. And so you have to think about all of those things when you're buying something, right? And there was a post that I made on Twitter, which maybe you guys can dig up at some point, but it was just like I was thinking about the different layers of how to evaluate like an artwork, right? And the quote unquote like dumbest layer is like, what do you see? right? Like, what do you see is like the most shallow layer of understanding a piece of art. The next layer is thinking about what does it mean to me personally, right? When I see this, when I see that squiggle, what's the next layer of meaning that I'm putting on it? Then you think about what are other people putting on it, right? Then you think about what did the artist intend when they created this? Then you think about how does this work fit into that artist's story? Then you think about who is the artist and what is their contribution to the space been and what is it likely to be in the future. So I think about all those things before I'll buy any NFT because like we don't have to worry about storing space to store them, right? That's that. At least we don't have to worry about that anymore. But I think that you've got to have for everything in my collection, I've got like a thesis behind it, and I don't always like discuss those publicly, but there is a thesis behind every single piece that I've ever bought, and it wasn't that the price will be worth more. There's something I think there's something else that has to be true, and if that occurs, then price is probably going to be higher in the future. That's kind of my mindset. I don't jump straight to price, which I think probably like 80% of people in the NFT space do.
Yeah, I would also add to your thesis provenance, meaning, to own a Porsche is one thing, but to own a Porsche, driven by James Dean is another. I think that there's, again, that's on the 30-year time horizon. Not that DC's ever selling anything, but if you're able to finally pry one of his autoglyphs out of his hands, there might be some provenance there too, right? And I think that's really important for to collect around. It's something that I'm collecting around, again, not for today, not for returns tomorrow, but just because I truly, yourself being one of them, there's really some amazing people in the space, and to be able to be a part of, verifiably part of their journey, and to kind of carry the torch from that point is, I think, something a lot of people will start to relate to, and it becomes part of that self story to, weave it back into your thesis. So I'm ideating and creating mental models around that part too.
So you've been observational about the PFP space. You've participated in punks, but not too many more. What's your vision for the future of that space?
I think PFPs are so I actually kind of somewhat famously faded PFPs pretty early on because I didn't really, and I almost don't view punks as PFPs, though obviously they are. And PFP is short for profile picture, just in case anyone listening doesn't know. I didn't really think of punks at first as profile pictures. I saw people were buying them and then were using and at that point, only a few people had done it. And I had changed, I remember when I changed my profile picture to a punk, people were like, "What the hell are you doing, man?" And I was just like, well, I don't have to wear a suit anymore. And I thought this punk was kind of like a fun vibe. And I liked the look of the hoodie and the sunglasses. And I was like, why not? And I think looking at that movement from there, PFPs became this huge thing where everybody wanted to have some kind of like digital identity, because I think that part of the promise of digital spaces is you can be like who you want to be versus like who you might be in real life, and your physical appearance doesn't actually matter that much in a lot of cases for that online life. And so why should we be leading with it at all? And I think that's an important question that we're going to spend the next like 50 years or more understanding and thinking about as these digital communities become a lot more meaningful. But so I think that the PFP space still has a lot of potential. What I don't like is how dependent it's all become on like project roadmaps and stuff like that, right? So it's not like punks, people just bought them as like, I do think people bought them as art and collectibles and are just like, hey, let's buy this thing and let's use this, and it's just a fun way to present ourselves. I think that when you start thinking about like, well, what parties do I get into, and how what airdrops I'm going to get from this, I think it just becomes something that's different. And look, like I said, I faded that stuff early on, and I was wrong for a while, and then I became right, and then maybe I'll probably become wrong again, and then right again. And so I think if you want to participate in those types of projects, you just need to understand what kind of trust assumptions you're making, and don't assume that any creator, no matter how well capitalized they are now, is going to be around forever. And at that point, like, is it an asset that you want to hold for like decades? And I think the case for a lot of PFPs is like a lot of those participants maybe don't think like that. So maybe this is just like I'm projecting my own value system onto the way that these people view the world. But most of these things are not going to hold value in 10 or 15 years. I feel pretty confident in saying that.
Yeah, the social contracts are constantly changing, which is fine. We're all experimenting, and I want to lean into the experimenting. But I think what we're all going to nod our heads to is those kind of unspoken social contracts of art are rather implied rather than dictated by finances and roadmaps. So that's very
Right.
very prolific, and for the listeners who play in that arena, something to ponder. Buy more squiggles. All joking aside, uh, DC, do you have any closing remarks or anything you'd like to share with the community?
I think as this bull market gets started up, and we've probably seen our first bull market correction, there'll be other ones which test your conviction for the long term. Um, I think there's still there's a lot of opportunity in NFTs. I think about the market in one way. There's other people who think about it in other ways, and together we all together have a vote and participate and determine what's valuable for the long term. I've kind of given you a point of view for why I think some of these. Um, I hate to use the word historically important because the history is so short, but I think we can already see that some works have had outsized cultural impact. And I think it's, for me, those are always the works that I'm going to be gravitating towards the most. And sometimes it's a guess as to if something's going to have that impact. But I think that we're still in the very early stages of what I think will be that multi decade story. So the most important thing that if you're a collector in this space is don't overinvest, right? Because I think that if you can really put yourself in a position to buy things and hold them, right? The most important thing I've been able to do is put myself in a position to be able to hold stuff. Like put myself in a position where I didn't have to sell my autoglyph on a 2x or a ringer on a 2x. I've just been able to hold it. And I've seen it go up a lot more and then crash back down, and it's just like fine, and part of that is because I didn't overinvest. And so I think that's probably the hardest inclination that most people have to fight, because sometimes if you know that something is going to go up, or if you have a very good idea, you want to buy it, and then you want to buy it on leverage, and then all of a sudden you're trying to sell it. And honestly, if you want to play those games, it's easier to do it with like fungible tokens, because you can just buy and sell at will. I mean, some of these assets now you can sell into liquidity pools, but I really don't see the point. So I've never viewed myself as a trader. I think a lot of people who participate in the space would do better not trying to trade it or micro trade it as much as they do. I'm not saying you have to you should never sell an NFT. I mean, even during this market cycle, I do want to sell part of my collection, but it wouldn't be more than like 5 or 10% of it. My goal would be to hold most of this for the long term, because if I'm right where we're headed with like this, a lot of people probably don't buy into the vision yet, but if we get to this AR, VR, metaverse world, which I think people will be surprised how quickly it starts to happen. Like once the dam breaks, and it could just be Apple is getting into it, Meta's into it. Like these are two of the biggest tech companies. Like there's going to be, and everyone's going to follow them now, right? This is the beginning of that movement. I just think this concept of digital ownership becomes so much more important. So do you want to buy and collect this stuff during this rare period where nobody understands it except for like a few nerds like us online? Or do you want to wait until it's like everybody's clamoring for digital objects and there's only so many of them that were created before the year 2022 or whatever. And you had one, but you sold it because you were trading for something else. I mean, it's just to me, what's the point of doing all that? So invest what you can afford to lose and forget about, and you'll probably do well long term.
Yeah, I think the one of the things that I'm looking at for a mental construct is the younger generations really function in a digital world, and digital assets is really intuitive and native to their mindset versus some of the older generations right now who are speaking with their money. So, anyways,
Mm-hmm.
that's a future forecasting of as the future generations grow and mature and older generations are able to have access to the things like the Apple VR headset, you're going to see this marriage. And I think that that's what you're alluding to. You're going to see this, this merging of two different societal kind of mindsets that all emerge upon like a digital asset being valuable. But if you're interested, we could talk about this for hours. If you're interested in more of these deep thoughts, I would say follow DC on Twitter or X. His handle is I am DCinvestor. Honestly, one of my favorite follows on all of X. I don't know how you create so much incredible content, but you post on a very regular basis. And anybody who's wanting to have kind of a new perspective and just like you said, lean into that hive mind of a different perspective or an opinion that could potentially help you grow and mature your opinions. It's a really amazing follow. I would strongly encourage all listeners to do that. In addition to that, follow the SquiggleDAO. There is a Discord for SquiggleDAO, so please feel free to join that. If you own a membership token and or a Squiggle, you are gaining access to some, I'll call it gated content. If not, there is a free section. So please come in if you're interested in purchasing a Squiggle or DAO. People such as Nifty, people with an incredible amount of knowledge are here to help you. We want to make sure that investment that you're making is done with the utmost confidence. So please feel free to DM any of us. As always, please like and repost. This is an amazing interview. I will say, DC, thank you for your time. This has been a true pleasure. Looking forward to this one and appreciate all of your insight. It's been really, really amazing.
Thanks, guys. I've really enjoyed this conversation and hope the listeners do too.
No doubt in my mind, my man. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional or financial advice. The hosts and guests are not licensed financial advisors, accountants, or lawyers. The content is based on personal experiences, opinions, and research, and its accuracy, completeness, and timeliness cannot be guaranteed.